Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another special gathering. Before we begin, I want to know who's here with me tonight. Leave a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. All right, let's get to the first story. Good evening, Dom. My name is Kai. I've always tried to live life in a practical way, but certain events in my childhood ended up shaping my perspective on what people call the inexplicable. I grew up in a remote small town where part of my family still holds on to old customs and beliefs. I was never one to spread ghost stories, but I realized early on that some occurrences defied simple explanations. When I was little, around 7 years old, my mom used to say that I spent the nights talking to myself. On several occasions, she would wake me up in a panic, asking whom I was talking to. I never remembered anything specific, but I had a lingering certainty that I saw faceless silhouettes near my bed. Since the medical exams found nothing wrong with me, the family decided to ignore it and move on. I had inherited my maternal grandparents' house, located in a mountainous region. My grandfather passed away many years before I was born, but my grandmother, Grandma Lydia, was an active and joyful woman. She would tell me that in her youth many people turned to spiritual or faith healers when they got sick. Hospitals weren't talked about as much back then, and traditions were handed down from generation to generation. Every now and then she hinted that there were those who took advantage of such beliefs to cause harm. There was a time when my grandmother began to notice my sensitivity to certain signs. She mentioned that when the moon was full, I became more restless and complained about hearing creaks in the roof or smelling a strong scent of smoke that no one else noticed. Even so, she never made me feel afraid. On the contrary, she told me that some children are born with the door of perception slightly open, and that it didn't have to be a bad thing as long as I learned to respect what I didn't understand. As time went by, I got used to strange situations. Sometimes I would say I sensed the death of a neighbor, and a few days later, that person would actually pass away. The first time it happened, I refused to believe it myself. Then came other similar episodes that made me carry a constant fear of talking about it. I learned to keep quiet, worried that people might think I was a liar, or worse, see me as some sort of freak. In 2012, I got an opportunity to study at a better-equipped school in another town. I stayed temporarily at the home of an uncle, my mother's brother. I was excited for a change of routine, but upon arriving I sensed a certain tension. People were saying that in the surrounding areas, animals had been found dead in strange ways, with no clear evidence of predator attacks. Some residents prayed at the beginning of the evening and avoided staying out on the streets after a certain time. My cousin Clara, who was 14, told me that the week before I arrived, an unknown elderly woman knocked on the door asking for pain medicine. But when she answered, there was no one there. There was just a faint smell of burning outside. During that period, the nights felt quieter than usual. The sense of insecurity began to disturb me. One early morning, around 2 o'clock, I heard a sharp noise near the window of the room where I slept. I got up slowly and tried to peek through the crack. I couldn't make out a shape, but I saw something like a shadow moving in an irregular way. My heart raced. I thought of calling my uncle, but I lacked the courage to shout. Finally, I mustered enough nerve and opened the window to see better. There was absolutely nothing in the yard. The silence, however, made me even more uneasy. I spent the following days constantly on alert for any sound. My aunt and uncle Abert and Joanne noticed I was nervous, but they attributed it to the move. When I told them what I saw that night, He chuckled and said that area was full of ghost stories. My aunt, more worried, suggested I pray before going to bed. I chose not to press the matter. I got word that Grandma Lydia's health had become fragile and that she needed someone to stay with her in the old house. She didn't want to move to the city because she said she couldn't bear to lose her independence. Missing her, I decided to return and keep her company on weekends at least. My uncle, who had an old car, offered to take me whenever I wanted. That way, I could go to school during the week and stay with my grandmother on my days off. When I arrived at her house on that first weekend, I noticed she looked more frail. She tried to keep her spirits up but coughed frequently and said she had felt strange chills at night. I noticed a few objects in the house seemed out of place. A kettle that was normally stored in the cupboard had appeared on the living room table with no explanation. Some candles she used for praying vanished from a drawer. She commented that she might have just forgotten all that, but I saw anxiety in her eyes. The next morning, a man named Nolan, known in the area as a faith healer, knocked on the door. He said he was there to see if he could help my grandmother, because he had heard from a relative that the lady of the house wasn't doing well. She appreciated the visit, though she looked at him suspiciously, as if wondering who told him about her health. Nolan explained that some locals claimed they had seen an elderly-looking woman wandering near houses, knocking 3 times on windows and disappearing soon after. According to him, this had happened even in more remote neighborhoods. There was also a rumor that this woman carried herbs in a cloth sack and offered mysterious cures in exchange for favors. At first, I thought it was just an urban legend, but on the 3rd night I spent at my grandmother's house, I woke up to noises outside in the yard. They weren't normal. They sounded like soft footsteps among the gravel. I decided to turn on the light. When I reached the door, I hesitated. It was almost 1 in the morning. Still, I gathered my courage and opened it to see if anyone was out there. I found no one alive, but I felt that someone had passed by just moments before. I can't say I saw footprints, but the dirt looked disturbed. My grandmother woke up startled by my movements. She called out to me with a trembling voice, "Kai, what's going on?" I told her it was nothing. She insisted I come back inside and lock the door. She said that in recent weeks she had been waking up feeling a weight on her chest, but forced herself to stay quiet so as not to worry me. I tried to comfort her, but I was anxious myself. The next afternoon, her condition suddenly worsened. She felt dizzy and vomited. I called my parents, who told me to take her to a community clinic. We did some tests, and although she had taken ill, the results showed nothing severe. She was advised to rest and follow a lighter diet. We returned home, but I couldn't get the commotion of the previous night out of my head. For the rest of the week, I slept in the room next to hers, always alert for any noise. On Thursday night, not long after lying down, I heard a faint scratching sound by the window facing the yard. There was no wind, no tree that could be brushing against the glass. Even so, the noise continued for a few seconds. Finally, I decided to get up and open the curtain slowly. I saw only darkness, but I had the unsettling impression that someone had been there just seconds before. 2 days later, my mom arrived to visit and talk with my grandmother. Toward the end of the afternoon, we found her dozing in an armchair, but her breathing was labored. My mom tried to wake her, and she, still groggy, mentioned that she had dreamed of a woman with tangled hair who was asking to enter the house. Later, my grandmother couldn't recall exactly what she had said, only describing a sense of being stuck in a nonsensical conversation. It was as if the woman demanded something from her and she couldn't refuse. In the following days, a lady named Ginny came by to see my grandmother. People said she was known for praying over the sick. She asked me if any strangers had appeared in the area recently. I mentioned that man Nolan who had visited our house and also talked about rumors of an elderly woman knocking on doors. Ms. Ginny gave me a serious look. "Be careful, my boy. Sometimes evil presents itself as medicine." I wasn't quite sure what she meant, but it left me uneasy. My nights grew restless again. I dreamed of my grandmother talking to someone outside the front gate, but I couldn't hear their conversation. Whenever I tried to approach, I woke up drenched in sweat. To make matters worse, she started getting weaker, struggling even with everyday tasks. My parents and uncles teamed up to take her to the hospital again. Nothing turned up beyond mild anemia. Then something strange happened. My cousin Douglas, who also lived in that small town, came by saying he had seen a hooded figure roaming near my grandmother's yard. According to him, this figure stopped at the gate and, upon realizing it was being watched, turned around and left without looking back. When I pressed Douglas for more details, he clammed up. He said he didn't want to get involved in talk of witchcraft or neighborly feuds. My uncle Ebert, who was somewhat familiar with healing and prayer practices, decided to talk to Nolan, the faith healer who had shown up before. I wasn't expecting much, but I was willing to try anything that might help improve the house's atmosphere. That afternoon, Nolan came by and I stayed in the hallway listening to him speak quietly with my grandmother. He left with a worried look on his face, saying only that he would do a strong prayer and return later. He didn't explain much, but he left a bundle of herbs to be burned every evening, recommending that the smoke pass through all the rooms. On the first night after this simple ritual, something woke me around 3 in the morning. My grandmother was moaning in her room. I ran to her and saw that she was sweating profusely, speaking incoherent words as if trapped in a deep nightmare, yet her eyes were open. I tried to calm her, but she was in a state I had never seen before. I woke my mom, who was sleeping in the other room. While my mom tried to soothe her, I noticed Grandma Lydia whispering someone's name, but I couldn't make it out. In the days that followed, I hardly slept. I grew sick with worry, dealing with frequent headaches. I began having those occasional visions of figures, just like in my childhood. But now, everything seemed jumbled. My grandmother's illness, the fear something worse was coming, the sense that the house wasn't the same anymore. One day I heard my grandmother talking to herself by the living room window. She spoke in a low voice, as though bargaining over something. I approached quietly and asked if she was okay. She immediately stopped talking and looked startled, unable to explain what she was doing. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but she didn't want to elaborate. She only asked me not to leave her alone at night. In the midst of this tension, a woman appeared on the road saying she had come to pick up a package at Grandma Lydia's house. I asked who she was and what she wanted. She stared at me strangely, as though she already knew me. Her face was deeply lined, and her hair was tied up in a scarf. She said she needed to deliver a medicine for the sick lady, but didn't go into details. When I told her my grandmother was resting, the woman's expression hardened. If she doesn't take the medicine, she'll get worse. I argued we couldn't trust just anything. She continued, "Physical ailments begin in the soul. If we ignore them, death comes quickly." Her words intrigued me, but I declined the package she offered. It made no sense to accept something without knowing what it was. The stranger left with quick steps and vanished around the bend in the road. Later, I told my mum. She worried and said maybe I should have spoken with that woman to learn more about the remedy's origin. I chose not to reveal that the woman's gaze had given me chills. Soon after, my grandmother's health completely collapsed. She had high fever for several nights, delirious and mumbling about voices calling her outside. We went to the hospital again, and once more, the exams showed nothing. My mum decided we would move her to another uncle's house in a busier neighborhood, hoping that being away from that isolated place would help. Yet even there, she remained weak and distant. I stayed worried for a few days, but returned to finish my school commitments. One afternoon, I got a phone call from my cousin John, telling me that my grandmother had passed away. He didn't go into details, only saying, "It all happened really fast." I remember his exact words. "It seemed like she left as if she'd given up on fighting." I froze. A wave of guilt overwhelmed me. I remembered the woman offering that medicine and how I refused it. I remembered my grandmother's words about someone calling at the door. It was as if all the pieces made sense, yet none of them truly fit. I packed my things and went to my uncle's house, where her body was laid out for the funeral. Arriving there, I felt a heavy atmosphere. The family was gathered in the living room around the coffin, and among the people, I spotted the same woman who had offered the remedy. She wasn't looking at anyone, just staring at my grandmother with an odd indifference. I approached, but as soon as I neared her, she turned around and left. I didn't follow. I was too shaken to confront her. During the wake, I overheard relatives murmuring that the cause of death remained uncertain. Some mentioned that she might have been involved in something spiritual beyond the reach of medicine. Others assumed it was just her age and declining strength. My mom cried, hugging me. At times I felt short of breath, as if something in that room was pushing me away. I chalked it up to grief. The burial took place the next morning. I didn't see the strange woman again. Even so, I couldn't get her image out of my head. I kept wondering whether my grandmother might have escaped her fate if I had accepted the remedy. Despite rational explanations, I was consumed by remorse. I returned home dispirited. I began having recurring dreams of my grandmother calling me to a creek. But before I could take her hand, someone emerged behind her, preventing me from touching her. I woke up with my heart pounding. One night I had such a vivid nightmare that I had to get up and drink some water to calm down. Suddenly, I heard 3 dull knocks at the door. Using my phone as a flashlight, I checked and found no one there. I spoke to Nolan, asking him to help me understand what was happening. He met me on his front porch, where he hung several bunches of herbs. I told him openly about that woman, how she offered the remedy, and how my grandmother died soon after. He stayed silent for a moment, then said, "Kai, there are people who believe evil can extend from one generation to the next. Be careful not to inherit something your grandmother was facing." The idea shocked me. I asked what I should do. He suggested a protection ritual with prayers and smudging, but emphasized that each person ultimately has to find their own strength to face what they can't understand. Some time went by. I tried to live normally, though my dreams remained disturbing. I began experiencing frequent headaches, as if something was pressing on my temples. I sought distraction by walking around the neighborhood, chatting with friends, but a subtle unease always lingered. One night, as I returned home, I saw a figure standing near the gate. The street light was dim. It looked like someone wearing worn-out clothes. My body seized up. When I got closer, there was no one there. My uncle Ebert noticed my distress and took me to see a woman named Yara, who many referred to as a spiritual healer. She lived in a simple house by a creek, and treated people from all around. I told her everything that had been happening. Yara asked to hold my hand and closed her eyes. She didn't say anything extraordinary, just that I carried a sorrow that served as an invitation to negative influences. She suggested I take part in a prayer session by the creek where she often did her devotions. The night before we went, I had a strange dream. I saw my grandmother in a bright, almost empty space, and she pointed to my chest, as if reminding me of something important. I woke up repeating in my mind the words she used to comfort me in childhood. It felt like she was still present somehow, trying to give me strength. On the appointed morning, we walked down to the creek. Yara spread some leaves on the water and asked me to breathe deeply, thinking of my grandmother and asking forgiveness for any fault. I did as she suggested, feeling a bit awkward but hopeful. There was no grand phenomenon, just a sense of calm that I hadn't felt in weeks. Still, I glanced at the tree line, half expecting to see someone or something lurking there. In the following weeks, I started to improve. My nightmares lessened, and my headaches became less frequent. I came to realize that much of my pain was fueled by guilt and fear. During that time, Yara explained that many of us believe there is a malignant power outside of us, yet we forget what we harbor within. She didn't claim there was nothing supernatural involved. She simply encouraged me not to let my life be dominated by obsession. Gradually, my grandmother's memory became a source of comfort rather than a trigger for sadness. Even though I still recalled that mysterious woman, I began to consider the possibility that much of what happened could have a less fantastic explanation. Maybe the rumors, my grandmother's fragile health, the desperation for a quick cure, and my own knack for sensing signs all created a confusing scenario. Yet I still couldn't completely dismiss the notion that there was something beyond what my eyes could see. Today I strive to keep my balance. I take care of the house that once belonged to my grandmother, remembering her teachings. I keep a few prayers I learned from people like Nolan and Yara. But I'm not obsessed with proving whether hidden forces exist. There are nights when I think I hear strange noises in the yard, but I breathe deeply and move on with my life. Inside me, I still carry the feeling that I missed the chance to save my grandmother by refusing the remedy that woman offered. But if there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that answers don't always come from outside. Sometimes we just need to accept our own awareness and learn to cope with what we don't understand without letting fear dictate our every move. Before we move on to the next story, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to get the latest stories. Your presence means a lot, and your support is essential. All right, let's keep going. Good evening, Dom. My name is Vincent. I was born in a place people usually try to leave as soon as they get a chance. My mother, Ms. Isabel, raised me and my younger sister in a tiny house that barely stood on its own. The roof was made of old shingles, and when it rained hard, water would slip through the edges, dripping straight onto the cement floor. The house sat next to a dirt road that turned into a muddy mess during the rainy season. We didn't have a car or a motorcycle. My mother took the bus to work from Monday to Saturday, and each trip took her more than 2 hours going and coming back. The house where she worked was huge. To this day, I've only seen a place that big on TV screens. She cleaned, did the laundry, cooked, took care of purebred dogs, and even cleaned the pool. Her employer was a man I rarely saw, but I knew he had all kinds of business and a lot of money. My mother said he was always traveling abroad for deals. Even so, he hated wasting anything on employees, especially a cleaning lady. Sometimes she'd come home saying he had docked her pay for arriving late when her bus broke down. Other times she confided that she slept in a damp little room in the back of the house whenever she had to work extra hours, and it wasn't worth paying for another bus fare late at night. I was about 10 years old when I started accompanying her during school vacations. We slept in a bunk bed the house staff called the backup bed. It was a space where if I sneezed too loudly, they'd hear me in any nearby room. The walls showed signs of moisture, leaving dark stains on the plaster. Sometimes there was a bucket next to the bed to catch water from leaks. The boss and his wife rarely appeared, but when their children were around, they acted like my mom and I were invisible. Once the older son threw me a pair of used sneakers. "If you want them, you can keep them. They already ordered me a new pair." I stayed quiet and picked up the shoes. They were a bit too big for my feet, but I couldn't refuse. I only had one pair that was already full of holes. At least those sneakers wouldn't leave my toes scraping the ground. I thanked him, but I felt strange, unsure whether to be grateful or humiliated. My mother told me not to hold on to resentment, that she worked there because she needed to. She'd always finish with some religious phrase like, "Faith sustains those who have nothing." I saw no sign of improvement in our lives, but I tried to agree. As I grew older, I realized my mother was sacrificing her own health to put food on the table. She came home late, exhausted, her back hurting. She had high blood pressure and kept postponing buying medication for lack of money. When she got sick, she missed work days and consequently lost pay. It was an endless cycle. I finished middle school in a public institution with leaking roofs and broken windows. At 15, I got my first side job washing cars in the street because the school lunch no longer kept me full, and I wanted to help at home. My mother objected. "You have to study, Vincent. If you drop out, you won't have any chance of moving up in life." I understood her concern, but how could I focus on books if we didn't always have enough food at night? While my classmates were preparing for high school, I started looking for other temporary work. Laborer on construction sites, flyer distributor, helper in a bar. None of these paid more than a handful of dollars. It was always the bare minimum, and I felt angry. I looked at the mansions my mother cleaned and thought about how rich people had everything handed to them. They didn't seem to care at all. When I turned 17, my mother lost her job. Her boss sold the house to another tycoon and let all the long-time employees go. We tried to survive on what I earned, but it wasn't enough. We ended up moving to an even smaller place near a patch of overgrown land. When it rained, water leaked in under the door. The electricity went out frequently. My mother was getting sicker, and I couldn't afford better health insurance or better medication. She relied on what the public clinic offered, which often was nothing because they were out of stock. One day, I overheard two co-workers chatting while I was washing cars on the street. They talked about a store owner who supposedly made some dark promise and got rich overnight. In the end, they said the store owner's wife died suddenly. No explanation. The conversation was full of rumors, but that same night, I went on the internet searching for anything about pacts, promises, or bargains. I found forum after forum, all with people recounting alleged rituals or charms. Most of those posts seemed silly, but over time I found a more serious group discussing ancient texts, strange symbols, prayers in unfamiliar languages. Some talked about ways to attract money and prosperity, I also found warnings about disasters that followed. It all seemed absurd, but I was desperate, and in some twisted way it fascinated me. I started staying up late, reading about it while my mother slept in the next room. I could hear her coughing, getting worse every day. One day I decided to try a simple ritual I'd read about in one of those forums. They said you had to light candles, draw certain symbols, and repeat mysterious words. I bought cheap candles and locked myself in our only bathroom, which also had moisture stains on the walls. I sketched the symbol I saw on my screen onto a piece of paper. I tried to repeat what was written, but I didn't feel anything unusual. After about 15 minutes, there was nothing left but the smell of burnt candle. I put everything out before my mother woke up. I felt stupid for having believed in that talk. Yet something inside me said not to give up. I kept reading, looking up instructions for other pacts, names of entities that promised money, fame, and success. Among them, I found one that supposedly didn't require terrible sacrifices. The description said you had to offer something symbolic of personal value, an object plus a few drops of your blood to seal the deal. It claimed the entity granted requests related to wealth, as long as you were willing to face unquestionable consequences. It sounded like a legend, but I was intoxicated by those readings. Every day my mother's coughing worsened, and I saw the fear in her eyes. She didn't say it outright, but I knew her health was deteriorating. I decided to follow this more serious ritual without telling anyone. I bought powdered sulfur and some strong incense from a small makeshift shop. At a junkyard, I found an old metal piece that, according to the post, could serve as a catalyst. It was a broken trinket, but in my head it seemed sufficient. I wrote down formulas, prepared a circle with salt, turned off the lights, and at midnight, I started reciting what I had practiced. I silently stated everything I wanted: money to help my mother, to leave that misery. The incense stung my nose, sweat broke out on my forehead. At some point I thought I heard a crack in the ceiling, but maybe it was just the wood expanding. I finished the ritual, opened the door to our living room, and felt ridiculous again. Everything was silent. Nothing fell from the sky. No voice told me I'd receive help. I put out the remaining candles and looked at the circle of salt, wondering if it was all nonsense. Before I went to sleep, my mother called softly. "Are you all right, son? I heard a noise." I said yes, I just dropped a bucket of water. She believed me and dozed off again, hugging her pillow as if she were cold. The next day, I went knocking on doors looking for a job. I got hired as a stock clerk at a small grocery store. It wasn't much, but at least it paid a bit more than washing cars. I thought it was just coincidence. But that night in my room I wondered, if any ritual was really working, maybe this was the start of something. I worked at that grocery store for about 2 months. It was tiring. I hauled heavy packages, organized shelves, and cleaned the area where they threw out expired products. The owner treated me well, but the pay was minimal, and almost all of it went toward medicine and basic food. My mother got a little better when she could afford some pricier pills. She even smiled one day and said, "Looks like things are moving forward, huh, Vincent?" I wanted her to be right. But after those 2 months, I developed a knee problem from lifting boxes incorrectly. I had to take a few days off, and when I returned, the owner said she couldn't keep someone who couldn't stand for long periods. I lost the job. A knot formed in my throat, but that was our reality. I limped back home and found my mother crying because she knew we wouldn't be able to pay the electric bill that month. The humiliation felt endless. That's when I remembered what I had researched. Almost everyone in those forums said that to guarantee the pact, You had to perform a more elaborate ritual on a specific date, using certain items that showed seriousness. I didn't believe in it so much anymore, but there was a desperate part of me willing to try again. Over the next 30 days or so, I prepared carefully, used the last of my money to buy better candles, a different incense, a clay chalice, and a dark cloth. The right day would be during a new moon phase, and the recommended time was between 2 and 3 in the morning. My mother, exhausted, would be fast asleep. I would do everything in the living room. On the appointed night, I spread the cloth on the floor, placed the candles around it, drew a symbol with chalk that I found in a digital file, lit the incense, and knelt down with the chalice in my hand. I trembled a bit, but repeated the lines I had memorized, promising to give part of myself, blood, in exchange for prosperity. I made a small cut on my finger and let a few drops fall into the chalice. The smell of blood mixed with the incense. Then I heard a slight creak at the windows. It wasn't obvious, but my heart raced. Suddenly, I felt a strange warmth on my back, though it could have been just my nerves. I stayed there for several minutes, not talking, not moving. Afterward, I blew out the candles and cleaned everything up. I figured my senses were playing tricks on me with those creaking noises, due to fear and tension. The next morning, I noticed my mother coughing harder than usual. I felt a sting of guilt, but said nothing. 2 weeks later, I found a note slipped under our door, announcing a job opening at a new insurance company starting in our area. They offered paid training and potential commission. I went to the interview, and they called me to start in 10 days. From then on, everything seemed to move fast, yet still somewhat plausible. Training lasted about a month, and I gave it my all. In just over 2 months selling insurance, I was already making more than I ever had in any previous job. It seemed like something was truly boosting every deal. When I got my first check, it was clear I'd be earning far more than at any other job. I was able to buy quality medicine for my mother, fix small problems around the house, and even get a new phone for myself. She was happy but also suspicious. Once, while I was sorting bills, she asked, "How did you find this job so quickly?" "I saw an ad, Mom. I guess I got lucky." Sales kept increasing, and in about 4 more months I was receiving praise from my boss, who called me a phenom. One colleague said I was the rising star in the department. One day, I got a surprising bonus. I bought a good fan for the house and even replaced the old leaking shingles on the roof. It was around this time that I started hearing a recurring noise in the attic, as if something was moving around at night. My mother commented, "It sounds like an animal running up there, maybe a rat or a possum." I'd go up with a flashlight and find nothing, just wood and shingles, no nests, no footprints. I'd go back down without an explanation. Maybe it was just the wind, but for some reason it reminded me of the ritual and it left me uneasy. Weeks passed and every insurance contract I signed brought even bigger profits. I started dressing better, wearing an expensive cologne. I bought a used car for my mother so she wouldn't have to rely on the bus anymore. She was overwhelmed with emotion, tears in her eyes as she held the key. "Is this real, Vincent? I can't believe it." Even though she was sick, she thanked me like I was a hero. But at night her cough returned and sometimes came with chest pain. She tried to hide it, but I could tell. I insisted that she needed regular checkups and exams, but there were long wait times in our city, and even with money, certain cardiac procedures required specialists in larger medical centers. Appointments were hard to come by. I decided I'd take her as soon as we could get scheduled. Now that I had money, I couldn't stand seeing her suffer. During this period, I started having strange dreams. In some, I was signing page after page of paperwork, unable to stop. In others, I wandered in a dark place, unable to figure out where I was. I'd wake up without remembering the details, just an unsettling feeling. I'm not saying it was something supernatural. Maybe it was my worn-out mind, because I was working too much and worrying about everything at home. My sales continued skyrocketing. Not only was I making great commissions, but the higher-ups noticed me and offered me the chance to manage a small team. In about a year, I doubled my income, and my bank account showed figures I'd never dreamed of. By then, I moved my mother and myself into a more comfortable home, with tiled floors and a spacious living room. She still had health problems, but she was in a better place. We finally had some new furniture and a state-of-the-art stove. I could hardly believe the turnaround. It was around that time I got a phone call. My mother had gone for a routine appointment at a private clinic. Her doctor requested urgent tests. I scheduled and paid for them. That's when we found out she needed a serious cardiac procedure. She ended up staying in the hospital for 2 weeks. It seemed her body was getting weaker every day. On the 5th day of her stay, I sat by the bed, holding her hand. She touched my arm and asked, "Are you happy, son?" "I am, Mom. You're going to get better and we'll fix everything." She gave me a small smile, but I could see an unease behind it. She didn't say more, but she whispered, "I'm scared." I spent the night in her room trying to sleep in a stiff chair. Around 4 in the morning, I woke to her breathing heavily. I called for the nurse, who told me to stay calm, but in a matter of minutes her heartbeat plummeted. I froze. They tried to revive her, brought in equipment, shouted instructions, but nothing worked. It was a quiet morning. A doctor came in and quickly shook his head in the negative. I felt hollow. My mother was gone. I stood there motionless, not crying at first, just a huge emptiness. It felt like the hospital walls were closing in on me. I went through the funeral arrangements, the burial, the paperwork. I paid whatever it cost and didn't care about the money. I blamed myself because, despite having helped her financially, I couldn't stop the illness that consumed her. It wasn't a fair trade. Seeing her pass away, I remembered those old readings that claimed someone always pays the price. I wondered if it was tied to my crazy pact, but I figured it was just life being cruel, as always. Still, in the few hours of sleep I managed, I dreamed of my mother looking at me silently, as if asking, "Why?" After the burial, I returned home drained. I didn't start my car for days. Everything felt pointless. My colleagues sent me condolences, giving me time off, and I spent my days staring at the walls. The house was full of things I had bought for my mother: an orthopedic mattress, a closet with soft bedding. She never got to enjoy them. It tore me up inside. When I went back to work, I noticed my sales were still remarkably high, almost as if the universe had opened an endless door of clients. Part of me was relieved that money wouldn't be an issue, but I felt dirty caring about finances after my recent loss. To make it worse, I sensed some co-workers eyeing me strangely, as if I were someone who'd climbed too fast. Some of them asked, "How do you sell so much, Vincent?" Or, "Do you ever fail? It's just success after success, right?" I dodged those questions, not knowing how to explain. Part of me felt disconnected from it all, like those wins weren't really my own doing. One night I got home late, sat in the living room and picked up an old photo of my mother smiling. I had a vague impression of hearing footsteps in the hallway. I stood to check, but no one was there. It reminded me of the creaking I used to hear in the attic. I looked around. Everything was locked. No sign of forced entry. The following day, a co-worker who gave me a ride asked something odd. "I heard you lost your mother, my condolences, but I also heard you inherited money from some distant relative. Is that true?" "No, that's not true." "Then how'd you get so wealthy so fast?" I turned toward the window. I wasn't about to talk about rituals, pacts, and things I didn't fully understand. I preferred silence. After that, some deals came through without me lifting a finger. Agencies contacted me wanting to partner, and commissions arrived already signed before I even had a meeting. Every day, I got calls from companies looking to close contracts. It was like something was paving my way. I felt a mix of gratitude and disgust. I started drinking more often, coming home buzzed, tossing my jacket on the couch, and passing out in my room exhausted. Before sleep, my thoughts circled back to that ritual. Was it really powerful? And if so, what was the price yet to be paid? One weekend I went to a company awards event. Everyone praised me. Some executives came to congratulate me in person. I got a small trophy as a top seller. After the ceremony, I went to a bar with some staff. They celebrated, but I couldn't. A woman introduced herself as Carla, saying she also worked in insurance and that I was becoming a national phenomenon. She invited me elsewhere, but I declined, saying I was tired. I drove home alone, thinking of my mother. On the way, I thought I saw someone sitting in the back seat via the rearview mirror, but it was just my tired eyes. I pulled over, took a deep breath, and drove slowly home. A few days later, I had insomnia and started rummaging through drawers. I found my notebook with all the packed notes, along with that broken metal amulet. A strange pulse went through me. I decided to throw it all away. I grabbed a trash bag and stuffed in the notebook, the amulet, the clay chalice, and the leftover candles. I took it outside, left it by the curb. I thought I'd feel better, but when I came back, the room still felt heavy. I tried to ignore it and went to bed. That night, I had a nightmare of the house filled with muffled. In the following weeks, things got chaotic. The company promoted me again, this time to an even higher position with a generous base salary and benefits. I moved to a bigger home with a yard and space for guests. I hired a cleaning lady twice a week, yet I never felt at ease. I always sensed something missing, and sometimes I heard faint noises, like the floor creaking when no one was walking on it. One time the cleaning lady mentioned, "Mr. Vincent, are strange things happening here. I close the windows, but they're open again when I return." I shook my head, saying I didn't know anything, and asked her to just keep doing her work. Truth is, I avoided thinking about it. I threw myself into my job. I was surrounded by meetings and money, but I'd come home and sleep terribly. One Saturday, I got in my car early and drove to our old neighborhood. I wanted to see how things were. I passed by the house where we used to live, now with peeling paint. Part of the roof had caved in. Some neighbors saw me and waved, but I didn't get out of the car. They seemed curious how I had become so well off. I chose not to talk. A lump formed in my throat, and I drove away. That visit rattled me. I remembered my childhood, my mother telling me never to give up on school. I also remembered how I'd begged for money, for a chance. Maybe I did get it, but something vital was lost along the way. Whether it was coincidence or fate, I'll never know. Life went on, and for a while I tried to push aside any thoughts of pacts. Even so, I was afraid it was all affecting my mind. Sometimes I dreamt of my mother lying in an empty place, and I tried calling her. Other times I seemed to be talking to a faceless figure, begging it to leave me alone. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, unsure if it was just stress or something more. A few more months passed and I noticed a drastic shift in the market. The insurance companies I worked with came under investigation for alleged contract irregularities. Many clients cancelled plans or cut their terms short, fearing fraud. Management put pressure on everyone, including me, to fix the situation. Within about 2 months, I was no longer receiving half of what I used to. Then, unexpected costs popped up, lawsuits, and the company started delaying payments. My luck seemed to collapse all at once. I clung to what I had left, but my expenses were too high. Owning a bigger house meant higher property taxes and maintenance. My investments tanked along with the slump in the insurance sector, and nothing I did stopped the financial bleed. I spent sleepless nights wondering if there was a way to undo whatever I'd brought into my life. But I'd already discarded everything. Maybe it was too late. With my savings gone, I had to sell the house and move to a smaller place, almost as modest as where I'd lived before getting rich. It wasn't the same run-down neighborhood, but still a simple area with little comfort. I felt like a failure, though part of me was relieved to be away from that large house that had terrified me. For a while I was jobless, surviving on small freelance consulting gigs, because at least I had experience in sales and insurance. My golden period went by in a flash. No more calls from executives or invitations to big events. The few former colleagues who stayed in touch asked if I was okay, but they had little to offer. I spent a lot of time reflecting on everything. If there truly was a supernatural influence, I had drawn something that gave me easy money and, in return, took my mother, my peace, and eventually everything I'd gained. If it was just life, then it had given me a shot and taken it back just as fast. Either way, the result was the same. I was back to square one, only now without the most important person by my side. I thought about revisiting those online forums for some ritual of breaking the deal. But deep down, I figured it was pointless. I'd already paid a steep price. Besides, I'd thrown away all the materials, so I let time pass. I used my last few dollars to start a small service business, helping smaller offices with payroll, taxes, and documentation. Nothing glamorous, but it kept me fed. I won't lie, I still have strange dreams. Sometimes I wake with the feeling my mother is watching me, sad about something I did. Other times, I get an email or a phone call from an old co-worker saying they miss my sales performance. I clear my throat, mumble something non-committal, and end the conversation. I don't feel any desire to return to that world. Everything around me has settled into a modest normal. I don't have much, but at least I don't deal with eerie noises in the attic or creepy sensations in the hallways. Peace might be too big a word, but I'm calmer now. From time to time, I still wonder if I truly summoned something or if life's coincidences just handed me a quick opportunity before taking it away. On certain nights, I have nightmares and wake up sweating, feeling like I've just returned from a long journey. I drink some water, look at the walls of my modest home, and feel smaller than ever. No family, no luxuries, but with the certainty that maybe this is the best I can have now. In the end, the question that lingers in my mind is, was it worth it? I always reach the same conclusion. No, it wasn't. No success is worth losing someone you love or the ability to sleep without dread. Today, I live on what I earn in my small business. I've learned a lot about myself and maybe about the world. I still feel a pang in my chest whenever I see news about someone who suddenly becomes very rich. I can't prove anything, but something deep inside me remembers that in order to gain, you must give something in return. And if that something is our happiness, I'm not sure it's worth the risk. I still keep a few pictures of my mother in an envelope. I no longer leave them out because they make me miss her too much. Sometimes I think it's not fair. She suffered her whole life. She deserved to live longer to see if things would truly get better for us, but life doesn't read our rules. If there is any supernatural force looking to exchange favors, it sure doesn't offer guarantees. All I can do now is share my story, so no one else makes the same mistake. And to remind you that money without peace means nothing at all. If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to leave a like. It really makes a difference. Okay, let's continue. My mother passed away when I was 4 years old, and ever since then I was raised solely by my father, a man everyone knew as Mr. Claude. He always had a reputation for being stern and impatient, but he never failed to encourage me when it came to studying. He used to say that if I wanted a different future, I should open my books and put in the effort. Maybe that was his way of dealing with his own pain. He clung to the idea that I needed to grow up with better opportunities than he ever had. When I turned 18, I did something that seemed unthinkable at the time. I asked my father for permission to go study law in the state capital. He agreed, though without showing much enthusiasm. He said he would send me a little money while I managed with temporary jobs, as long as I didn't drop out of my classes. I accepted without hesitation. It was my chance to leave the farm, or the place, as my father liked to call it, and experience life in a big city. Even at a distance, I kept in almost daily contact with the farm, asking about the cattle, the crops, and my father's health. Still, whenever I called, he avoided talking much about himself. He said he was fine, but needed more farm hands to help with the tasks, since the property wasn't small. I missed a few things: the smell of wet soil after the rain, the simplicity of meals cooked on a wood-burning stove, the rooster crowing before sunrise. But overall, I was happy with the freedom city life gave me. At the beginning of my 3rd semester, though, everything fell apart. I was leaving a criminal law class when I got a call from Mary Lou, who had worked on the farm for as long as I could remember. She sounded shaky. She told me my father was very ill, too weak to get up, and that home remedies weren't working. From the way she spoke, I understood it might be serious. I felt a tightness in my chest. I had never seen my father complain of pain or any discomfort, and hearing this crushed me. I packed my things and took the first bus back to the countryside without a second thought. I arrived at night. Mary Lou met me at the gate, her eyes filled with sorrow, and pulled me into a hug that felt like a desperate attempt to reassure me everything would be okay. After walking through the yard in the dark, I entered my father's bedroom and faced a scene I'll never forget. He was pale, sweating cold, and struggling to breathe. He muttered something I took as an apology for pulling me out of college. It was the only sentence he managed before sinking back into a heavy silence. Over the next few days, I tried to convince him to go to the state capital for tests, but he refused to leave. He said if it was his time to go, he wanted to be on his land. Meanwhile, I fell into an exhausting routine, getting up before dawn to check the cattle, seeing what needed fixing, negotiating debts I found stuffed in drawers, and attempting somehow to keep up with my studies on my own. The farm wasn't small, but the neglect I saw in certain areas worried me. It didn't take long to realize that besides my father's illness, there was a whirlwind of financial problems. One afternoon, I stopped by the local general store to buy some supplies. There, I heard talk about a woman who had recently arrived in town. People mentioned how she was reserved, always wearing dark clothing, and attracted attention wherever she went. It was just a piece of gossip that slid into my ears without sparking much interest, since I was too focused on dealing with my father's pain and the farm's problems. I was never one for parties or rumors, so I brushed it off. But fate sometimes plays tricks on us. About 3 weeks later, there was a local festival in the area. Live music, food stands, a bonfire, and strings of little flags hung from the posts. I thought it might be a good chance to talk with other farmers and, who knows, maybe sell a few cattle to cover urgent debts. I arrived and watched people dancing and laughing. Amid the colored lights, I saw someone who stood out from the crowd, a tall woman in a black dress with dark hair cascading over her shoulders. And there I was, watching her with the same curiosity she seemed to have about me. We exchanged a slightly awkward glance, and when I tried to pull back, she approached me with a determined air. She introduced herself as Aline, asking if I was the one in charge of Mr. Claude's farm. I nodded, not quite sure how she knew anything about my life. She greeted me with a slight smile, said a few scattered things about how she had just moved there, then quickly suggested we talk someplace quieter. It all felt so fast, yet I found myself strangely drawn to the intensity in her words. We ended up leaving the festival, and she drove me down a little traveled dirt road. We stopped at a spot with almost no light. It was one of the most impulsive moments of my life. We kissed in a rush, with an urgency that almost startled me. When she dropped me off at my door, I was still trying to process what had happened. I couldn't sleep that night, replaying that memory that swung between desire and guilt. After all, my father was fading in a room just a few steps away. In the days that followed, I kept in touch with Aline through text messages. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt a rush of excitement to relive those intense moments, but also a wave of fear. I wasn't in a position to get involved with anyone. I had to take care of the place, look after my dad, fix financial problems, and grapple with the powerlessness I felt about his illness. Even so, she invited me to ever more daring rendezvous in isolated places. She even proposed we visit the local cemetery at night, saying she loved the silence and the mysterious atmosphere. It was bizarre, but, in some inexplicable way, intriguing. Up to then, I had no concrete reason to distrust her. It was just all so strange. Despite being, at minimum, a scary suggestion, I agreed. Maybe I was desperate, drowning in chores and internal conflicts. So we went to that small cemetery with low walls and old headstones. We slipped through a partly open gate and settled behind a worn family tomb. No one saw us. Every time I kissed her, I felt a surge of euphoria, but right afterward I was overtaken by a deep exhaustion, as though I had been running for hours. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. As weeks went by, my father's health deteriorated. He spent his days battling fevers and bouts of pain that were heartbreaking to witness. I had no money for hospitalization or specialized treatment, and he refused to be taken away. During that same period, the cattle fell ill in strange ways. I lost 2 cows within days with no clear explanation. It felt like everything around me was crumbling. Mary Lou helped however she could, but she was overwhelmed too. Every so often she asked where I was sneaking off to so late, and I lied. inventing something about visiting suppliers in another town. Each time I met with Aline, I came back more confused and drained. She seemed to sap my energy. I can't describe it better than that, but it felt like the air around us got heavier, and yet I couldn't say no. She also moved to a house closer to the farm, saying it would help her support me in my routine. In reality, though, she vanished whenever a real problem arose, complaining of headaches or some mysterious ailment. My father went into a severe respiratory crisis, and the local doctor was clear. Either he went to a specialized hospital, or his odds of surviving were slim. I tried to convince him again, and once more he refused, saying he wanted to end his days where everything had begun. It was agonizing. I spent sleepless nights juggling farm duties with standing vigil by his bed. Aline, meanwhile, didn't show much concern and kept insisting that I unwind with her late at night in increasingly eerie locations. On the night my father died, I felt an indescribable pain. It was like a hole in my chest. Aline offered me a cold sort of comfort. She even suggested that life is just like that. People go when it's their time. Words that sounded hollow to me. Mary Lou arranged a simple funeral in the cemetery, with a few neighbors and friends. Burying my father in that same place I'd been sneaking off to with Aline filled me with overwhelming guilt. I couldn't stop thinking that maybe I should have done something differently. Maybe I should have quit those meaningless outings and focused more on his health. But the problems kept piling up. Some of the fences started breaking without explanation. The cattle were restless at night, and rumors spread that something bad was haunting the farm. I wasn't sleeping well, waking up sweating and out of breath, but I chalked it up to stress. Aline stayed in my house, insisting we should be closer than ever now. Yet when I tried giving her responsibilities, she disappeared for hours. Mary Lou, worried, called a friend of hers, Ms. Darlene, to help with cleaning and cooking. This woman arrived unexpectedly, with few bags and a determined look. The moment Aline saw her, she tensed up, complaining of headaches because of the smell of herbs Ms. Darlene was burning to purify the house. I wasn't sure whether to believe in that kind of purification, but any help was welcome, especially since in the first days of her stay, the farm's routine seemed slightly less chaotic. One evening, Ms. Darlene asked me to chat in the kitchen. She said she sensed something strange hovering in the house. She asked if I had any idea who Aline was, where she came from, and why she was so obsessed with staying on the farm. I had no answer. Deep down, I also couldn't understand how everything happened so suddenly. All I knew was that Aline had shown up out of nowhere, bringing a disturbing energy with her. Still, I couldn't pull away. The suspicions didn't stop there. Mary Lou told me that some of the farmhands had quit, saying they saw strange movements at night and didn't want to risk their lives. It made me uneasy to hear it, but I couldn't force anyone to stay. Aline kept urging me to go on these late-night excursions. One night we met by a giant old tree. As soon as we got back, I was hit with a high fever and nausea that lasted until morning. A few days later, I got a visit from a man named Anthony who said he represented a group of investors. He handed me his card, mentioning he knew about my financial troubles and could buy part of the land at a good price. I was tempted since my debts were huge, but I felt held back by memories of my father and how much he valued this farm. I asked for some time to think. Anthony left, warning that the offer wouldn't stand forever. That same day, I noticed Aline was gone for almost the entire afternoon. She only showed up at dusk, looking tense and wearing a cloying perfume. She told me it was time we did something different at the cemetery, some sort of ritual to feel more free. It sounded odd, but I was so worn out that I agreed. We went there, hopped over the gate again, and in the shadows of the headstones my knees gave out. It was as if my legs couldn't support me anymore. At that moment I didn't see anything blatantly supernatural, but I had the strong sense of some disturbing presence near us. Aline practically dragged me back home. I only regained full awareness in the middle of the night, with a ringing in my ears. When I woke, she wasn't in the room. I felt dizzy for a while before I managed to stand up. The sun was already rising and I could hear Ms. Darlene's voice from the yard, chanting what sounded like a prayer. I felt a flicker of relief. Even though I didn't fully understand her methods, it was comforting to see her standing firm amidst all that chaos. It was the next night that everything came to light. Ms. Darlene announced she would conduct a spiritual cleansing in the house, asked Mary Lou to stay alert, and warned me not to go out, especially with Aline. At first I agreed, but Aline's insistence that we go for a drive was so intense I almost gave in. However, Ms. Darlene opened the windows and began spreading something that looked like salt mixed with herbs. Instantly, Aline started feeling ill. She sat on the floor, claiming the smell was unbearable. Then she stood up in a panic, as if trying to run for the door. When I tried to help, she shoved me away and started shouting disjointed words that suddenly turned into a confession. Aline screamed that Mr. Claude was her father, that he had rejected her in the past, helping to drive her mother away decades ago. Her head was filled with hatred and hurt. From the way she spoke, I could tell it wasn't just about money. She wanted total destruction, to see the farm collapse, and if possible, to drain my future as well. I stood there, paralyzed. Ms. Darlene and Mary Lou stepped in. While Ms. Darlene held up what looked like a small wooden crucifix, Aline staggered, spat curses, and sobbed. That was the moment I realized the full impact. My father, near the end of his life, never told me I had a half-sister, and she, driven by her mother's resentment, had planned every detail to get close to me, win my trust, and sink the farm. I found the strength to grab Aline by the arm and usher her to the living room door. She resisted but was weak. She tossed a few suitcases on the floor, snatched only 2 bags, and left without looking back. I followed, speechless, as she disappeared down the dusty dirt road. I returned inside with trembling legs. This time it wasn't exhaustion from forbidden kisses or secret outings. It was the shock of realizing I'd had an intimate relationship with someone who was my own blood, even though I had no idea at the time. Ms. Darlene continued her prayers throughout the house. She placed candles at certain spots, burned herbs in each room, and asked Mary Lou and me to help keep the place orderly and follow her cleansing rituals. In the days that followed, I avoided going out at night and focused on organizing the accounts. Little by little, my body started recovering from a fatigue I hadn't realized could fade. The fever subsided, the headaches eased, and even the cattle seemed calmer. It was like a weight had been lifted from us. Anthony, the man who wanted to buy part of the farm, came by again to push for an immediate answer. I looked at the place, still messy, steeped in debt, but realized it held my father's memory and my childhood. I couldn't sell. He left, irritated, saying there might be other offers. I thought to myself that if I had to start over, I'd do it right here, honestly, without tearing down the dream my father once had for me. With Ms. Darlene's daily spiritual cleansing and Mary Lou's help, the farm began to breathe again. I organized a workday to repair the fences, and sold some animals to settle the most pressing debts. Within a few weeks, the atmosphere felt lighter. We were still short-staffed, but some of the farm hands returned once they heard that the strange presence was no longer lurking around. 2 months after Aline's departure, I felt the urge to visit my father's grave. I went there with a lump in my throat, but no longer terrified. I stood by the fresh earth and spoke softly, saying that despite everything, I loved him and was taking care of the farm. I felt a deep sadness, but also a relief in knowing I was no longer trapped by some kind of spell, if I can call it that. The things that happened still rattled me, yet I could finally see a light at the end of the tunnel. Week by week, the farm got back on its feet and I started finding my own balance. I thought about going back to law school, but for the moment I felt it was more crucial to straighten out the farm situation once and for all. Another buyer approached me with a fairer proposal that allowed me to keep most of the land. After thorough analysis, I decided to sell only a small portion to wipe out the debts for good. That left me with a smaller property, but enough to invest in new crops and maintain the cattle. From then on, my days became a routine of waking up early, tending the animals, reviewing accounts, and working in the planting fields by late afternoon. Mary Lou stayed with me, practically becoming a second mother. Miss Darlene returned to her own town after a while, but said she'd come back if I ever needed her again. She left me with a set of prayers and protective practices that, to be safe, I still follow. I haven't seen Aline again. Rumor has it she moved elsewhere, but I never tried to find out. Even now I feel a mix of nausea and bitterness when I remember how close I came to being destroyed by that festering resentment. My consolation is knowing that things are finally in order, and maybe I can pick up the dreams I set aside. Taking care of this land has become my priority, but who knows? One day, I might find the time to return to the city and resume my studies. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that we can't hide from family secrets forever. They find a way to resurface, sometimes in the darkest circumstances. For now, I'm here, finishing these lines at the end of a quiet afternoon, watching the sun dip behind the hills. Out on the porch, I can feel the soft breeze and see the cattle grazing. Mary Lou calls me for dinner, and I head inside with a calmer heart, even though the scars remain. The farm is still standing, changed, smaller, but alive, and I carry on, determined to honor my father's memory the best way I can, free from any shadow that once tried to take hold here. My name is Anthony. Ever since I can remember, I've lived in a medium-sized city in the United States, nothing too hectic, but with reasonable job opportunities. Right after I finished a vocational course, I found work at a cardboard packaging factory. It wasn't my dream job, but it paid the bills. I started as a production assistant, in charge of checking the paper reels, organizing the machines, and keeping everything in order before the team arrived. I liked that routine, arriving very early, putting on my uniform, clocking in, and greeting my co-workers. While the machines warmed up, I would wipe them down with a damp cloth, removing dust and residue. It felt almost therapeutic. Each morning, I had the sense that I was building my independence. The factory was located in an industrial area a bit away from downtown. It was a large warehouse with a high ceiling that muffled street noise but amplified the sounds of the machinery. Inside, we pretty much communicated through gestures. Even so, the environment was tolerable. and the supervisors kept everything organized. The main supervisor was named Daniel. He had been with the company for several years and was firm about meeting goals, yet also considerate toward those who showed effort. A few weeks after I took on that position, I noticed a different atmosphere. People in the shipping department mentioned a new employee would be joining the production team. They didn't share many details. They just said she was new blood to reinforce the crew. No one knew if she would do the heavy lifting or work in the administrative area. I didn't pay much attention because I was worried about catching up on some delayed deliveries. Around 9 in the morning that Monday, I saw the side door open. A woman of medium height with black hair in a ponytail and a confident air walked in. Next to her was Nadia, the HR manager. They went straight to Daniel's office. I tried to focus on my work, but I couldn't help noticing them. Within minutes, Nadia and the newcomer were crossing the department to introduce the woman to everyone. "Everyone, this is Flavia. She'll be helping with cutting and pressing," Nadia said. "Nice to meet you," Flavia said, smiling casually. Her smile was somewhat captivating, though reserved. We exchanged quick glances. I noticed a tattoo on her wrist, some sort of complex symbol I couldn't identify. I didn't think much of it, but I mentally noted that she seemed different from other new hires. As the weeks went by, I started seeing odd behavior. Flavia hardly touched the machines, even though she was hired for precisely that. She spent most of her time in Daniel's office. Whenever we glanced through the glass partition, there they were, sipping coffee, laughing, chatting. We couldn't hear what they were saying, but the atmosphere between them seemed intimate. Some colleagues even joked that she'd become his personal assistant. Rumors were flying during lunch breaks that Daniel seemed completely taken with the new employee. I heard all kinds of comments. Some praised Flavia's looks. Others suggested she must have some pull to avoid getting her hands dirty. Still others doubted it all, thinking Daniel was just being kind. Inwardly, I felt uneasy. It seemed unfair that we were racing to fulfill orders while she apparently enjoyed special privileges. One Wednesday, I had to bring a production report to Daniel's office. When I walked in, I found Flavia sitting in his chair, rocking from side to side. Daniel, standing next to her, gave me a sheepish smile. "Did you need something, Anthony?" he asked, extending his hand for my papers. I handed over the documents and noticed that she looked at me somewhat indifferently. As I left, I saw that the tattoo on her wrist was more intricate than I had thought, with interlacing lines. I tried not to dwell on it, but the image stuck in my head. Life went on as usual. After a bit more than a month, rumors surfaced that Flavia was a mother of 3 and had had tumultuous relationships. Some co-workers claimed she was dangerous, that she liked married men, and that this had already caused problems at previous jobs. Others said she was just a woman trying her luck. I stayed neutral, but I confess she intrigued me. One afternoon after work, I stayed late to finish some last-minute cuts. The place was nearly empty, with only a few lights on. As I checked the control panel of one of the machines, I heard voices in the distance. I turned off the display and quietly walked toward the sound. I don't usually like gossip, but something compelled me to peek. When I got close to a metal door, I recognized Flavia's voice. She was speaking heatedly. "I do what you ask, but you need to keep your end of the bargain. Don't leave me hanging." I couldn't hear Daniel's response, but I sensed they were arguing. Feeling uncomfortable, I went back to finish my work. I got the impression there was strong tension between them. The next day, Flavia showed up smiling like nothing had happened, while Daniel appeared tired and quiet. It only heightened my sense that something was off. About 2 more weeks passed. During that time, Flavia kept having frequent visits to Daniel's office. The production staff wasn't even surprised anymore. What caught everyone's attention was that Daniel started coming to work with suspicious marks on his arms, neck, and even his face. He offered vague explanations, mentioning falls or bumping into corners. No one was naive. Most of us suspected his wife had found out something and was demanding answers. Meanwhile, Flavia continued to be seen with him around the neighborhood, at bars and restaurants. My personal life was stable. I helped my mother pay rent, didn't have a girlfriend, and spent my free time on online management courses. I wanted to move up in the company. Even with all that chaos, I saw my job as a stepping stone, but then everything changed. I arrived at the factory on a Tuesday morning as usual. I greeted the security guard and crossed the yard to the main warehouse. Some people were whispering, clearly upset about something serious. I tried to ask a co-worker, but he just indicated that I should talk to the supervisor. Reaching the section where Daniel usually stayed, I found one of the managers, looking very grave. "Anthony, we've had a complicated situation. Daniel felt ill here in the production area a few minutes ago and collapsed. The ambulance got here, but there were no vital signs. He passed away." It hit me like a punch. I had never witnessed anyone dying like that in the workplace. The manager told me Daniel's family would be notified and that the factory would shut down early that day. The company's internal safety committee was called in and standard investigative procedures began. I grabbed my things in disbelief, trying to process the news. Before leaving, I looked around for Flavia but didn't see her. Many co-workers wondered if she was somehow involved, though no one said it outright. The official line was that Daniel had a sudden heart attack, possibly caused by stress. 2 days later, the owner of the factory, Mr. Jordan, called me to his office. I was nervous, but he greeted me kindly. "Anthony, we need a new production supervisor. You're hardworking, you understand the machines, and you get along with the team. I'd like to offer you the position." I was speechless for a moment. Daniel's death still weighed on my mind, but I felt a surge of pride. I said I accepted, thanked him for the trust, and promised to do my best. It wouldn't be easy to replace someone so important, but I was willing to try. With the promotion, I got my own office and more responsibilities. I prepared reports, scheduled shifts, and oversaw the cutting and assembly of boxes. I quickly realized Flavia wasn't happy about the change. Before, she had privileges with Daniel. Now I expected her to actually perform her production tasks. In the first few days, she came into my office with smiles and subtle remarks, asking if I needed help with reports or if I wanted coffee. I appreciated the offer, but made it clear that it would be best if she focused on the production line. She would laugh briefly and walk away looking annoyed. A few weeks passed. The environment settled into a near-normal rhythm, though everyone still felt Daniel's absence. At home, my life had changed significantly. My salary went up. I managed to buy a used car after much research, and I also helped my mother move into a better place. I felt like I was entering a period of real progress. During that time, Flavia started approaching me differently. She would come to my office with trivial questions about orders or the timekeeping system, asking me to accompany her to the cutting station to check supposed issues. I found it strange because she'd been there long enough to know these procedures well. I remember one afternoon when almost everyone had gone to lunch. Flavia came into my office with a clipboard and closed the door. "Anthony, I have a problem here on the requisition form. Could you take a look?" She sat next to me, leaning in more than necessary, almost touching my arm. I could smell her soft but distinctive perfume. Looking at the form, I noticed there wasn't a real mistake, just a poorly filled header. I mentioned it was easy to fix in the system, but she stayed by my side, feigning interest in every detail on the computer screen. Suddenly we were very close, and she stared at me without blinking. Initially I tried to remain professional, but the tension was obvious. I had heard rumors about her and Daniel, yet her nearness evoked a blend of curiosity and fear in me. Then Flavia set the clipboard down. "You're working too hard, why don't you take a break?" she said with a wry smile. It was so sudden it caught me off guard. My heart raced. I told her I had to finish some reports, but she insisted, pointing out that I was entitled to a short break. Before I could refuse, she was already at the door, beckoning me. I followed her to a storage area in the back of the factory, where we kept extra cardboard sheets. It was a spot rarely used during the day. Inside, the smell of paper and dust was strong. She leaned against the wall and motioned for me to come closer. I hesitated, but I approached to see what she wanted. Instead of talking, Flavia grabbed my shirt and kissed me. I was overwhelmed, since I always avoided mixing work and personal life, especially with someone surrounded by rumors. Yet, at the same time, a startling desire overcame me. We tried to be quick to avoid getting caught. Before I knew it, we were locked in an embrace like two teenagers. After a few minutes, she smoothed her hair, flashed a casual smile, and went back to the production line as if nothing had happened. I stayed behind amid the cardboard stacks, torn between excitement and guilt. In the days that followed, these secret encounters happened more often. Sometimes in my car during an extended lunch break, other times in quiet corners of the warehouse. I felt an uncontrollable longing whenever I was near her, and that scared me. It felt like I wasn't fully in control of my decisions. Of course, word spread quickly around the factory. As discreet as we tried to be, the vibe between us was obvious. People gave me looks that said, "Careful you don't end up like Daniel." But I was so caught up, I ignored the warnings. My mother noticed something was off. I came home late and spent more money than usual. She asked if I was seeing someone. I dodged her questions, but she sensed it was serious. Then Flavia invited me to her home on a Saturday. She said it casually at the end of a shift. "My kids will love meeting you. They have so much energy. Come spend the day with us." Up to then, I only knew she had 3 kids, each by a different father, according to rumors. I wasn't sure I wanted to get involved to the point of dealing with children, but my desire to be with her won out. On Saturday, I got in my car and drove to the address she gave me, not caring about how long it took. When I arrived, I found the neighborhood a bit odd. It was a simple but tidy residential area, with row houses and thin walls. Flavia greeted me at the door with a wide smile, wearing a light dress. Inside, I saw toys scattered around and 3 kids. One looked about 9, another 6, and the youngest 4. They eyed me warily at first, then relaxed when Flavia assured them I was her friend. We spent the afternoon eating pizza and watching cartoons. She treated me like we'd been close for a long time. She even mentioned the oldest daughter attended the local school. The middle child stayed at a full-day childcare, and a neighbor helped look after the youngest whenever she worked extra hours. I had fun, but I still felt like a stranger in their routine. Late in the afternoon, Flavia pulled me into her bedroom. She said the kids were busy playing and wouldn't bother us. Once more we got intimate. I left feeling dazed, torn between fascination and unease at entering her life so fast. Back home, I couldn't sleep well. It felt like I was entangled in something pulling me in. I began spending more money on outings, taking Flavia and the kids out to dinner, buying them gifts. She said she needed financial help with the bills. My salary had increased, but I also had car payments, expenses on the apartment I was furnishing, and other obligations. I ended up in debt. My sister Thais noticed my strange behavior. One day she invited me for coffee. "You're different, Anthony. It's like you can't think about anything but this woman. Mom's worried." I told her she shouldn't interfere, that I was in love and wanted a new life with Flavia. Thais looked at me with concern and mentioned that some of her friends had negative opinions about my girlfriend. I got angry and told her to mind her own business. She went quiet, but kept insisting I should step away. 2 months went by. I was practically living with Flavia and the kids. I brought my TV, my gaming console, and some furniture. She even cleared space in the closet for my clothes. Curiously, sometimes she disappeared at night, saying she was visiting a friend, returning in the early hours. When I asked about it, she brushed me off. I avoided pushing too hard to avoid arguments. My family, worried, decided to intervene. A distant cousin who rarely spoke to me showed up at my door with a few friends. They said they needed to talk, and against my will, they took me to see an older woman known in the neighborhood for her spiritual gifts. I thought it was all nonsense and tried to refuse, but they were adamant, saying it was for my well-being. When we got there, the woman examined my hands, asked me to say a brief prayer, then tossed a handful of herbs in a bowl of water where I was supposed to pour my urine. At first I refused, thinking it was a ridiculous ritual, but my relatives insisted. Just to end the ordeal, I complied. Something strange happened. When I poured the urine, a foamy substance with a strong, foul smell appeared, and the spiritual healer shook her head in disapproval. "There's a heavy energy here. He's been bound." I didn't believe it, but everyone else's certainty shook me up. She asked me to kneel while she used rue and other plants over my body, blowing smoke from burning herbs. I felt nauseated and suddenly vomited right there on the floor in front of everyone. The stench was terrible, and I noticed some repulsive lumps in the mixture like wads of hair. I was so sick I could barely open my eyes. My sister and cousin acted like this confirmed everything. I remained skeptical, but I was frightened by the scene. The healer suggested I avoid seeing Flavia for a few days, saying the effect might still be harming me. They took me to my mother's place and basically locked me in for the night so I couldn't leave. After the shock, they considered taking me to a health clinic, but I insisted I felt better and refused. I got my phone back and saw dozens of messages from Flavia, indignant and asking where I was. The next day I went to work with my stomach still churning. I tried to avoid Flavia, but she followed me to my office. "Why didn't you come home? Did something happen?" I lied that there was a family emergency. She eyed me suspiciously. Later I made up another excuse, saying I needed to run errands in town, but I went straight to my old apartment, for which I still had the key. I went in and collapsed on the couch, trying to make sense of it all. For the first time in a while, my head felt clear, like I was escaping a trance. I thought about Daniel, dead, and how he too had drastically changed in his last weeks. I decided to break things off with Flavia. I didn't know if there was anything truly supernatural or if it was just a toxic relationship, but it wasn't doing me any good. For a few days I went to work and kept minimal contact with her. Whenever she showed up, I claimed I was too busy or gave her the cold shoulder. It wasn't easy because I still felt a pull toward her, but I stayed firm. That's when everything really fell apart. One afternoon, Flavia left the factory early saying she felt sick. That night, I got a call from one of her neighbors saying Flavia was in bad shape and asking for me. A wave of guilt swept over me, so I rushed over. When I got there, the house was a mess. The kids were crying in a corner, and Flavia was lying on the couch, sweating, her hair disheveled, her skin pale. "I don't know what you did," she mumbled, barely conscious. "Calm down, we'll get help," I tried, supporting her. When I lifted her slightly, she threw up. The odor was the worst I'd ever encountered. It seemed like something that didn't belong in a human body. The kids were screaming in panic. I grabbed my phone to call an ambulance, but had no signal inside. I ran outside and flagged down a driver passing by, asking them to call for medical help. I came back in to find Flavia unconscious, struggling to breathe. Her body went limp, her eyes half closed. The ambulance arrived minutes later, but she was already unresponsive. The paramedics refrained from asking many questions right then. They just rushed her to the hospital. I stayed behind to look after the kids until someone from her family showed up. The next morning, I received the news that Flavia hadn't made it at the hospital. They said it was apparently related to an infection, but more tests were needed. I was in shock, feeling guilty and confused. The kids were taken by an aunt who appeared out of nowhere. I had no legal right to intervene, so I just said goodbye, hoping they would be okay. At the factory, the news spread like wildfire. Some said she was cursed and that men who got involved with her always met a tragic end. Others simply felt sad that someone so young had died, leaving 3 children behind. For me, nothing felt real. I was still processing everything: the sudden promotion, the intense involvement, the forced distance, and finally her bizarre death. Mr. Jordan called me to his office again, worried about my state. He gave me a few days of leave to recover. I accepted, but I was afraid of being alone. I went back to my apartment and spent days locked inside, living off whatever food I had in the fridge and texting with my sister. She urged me to either revisit the spiritual healer or see a doctor, but I had no energy for anything. When I returned, the factory felt different. Some employees had quit, claiming they were afraid of bad energies. Others started attending religious services, seeking protection. I carried on, managing my supervisor duties, focusing on measurable, concrete things so I wouldn't lose my mind. Months later, I gradually reconnected with my family. I told them honestly what I had experienced with Flavia. I'm still not certain if I was truly bewitched or just caught in an intense, unhealthy affair. My mother and my sister supported me, saying the important thing was that I was free. My cousin, the one who took me to the spiritual healer, says that sort of thing defies simple explanations. Over time, I met someone else in a night class for industrial management. We started dating slowly, focusing on a healthier bond built on companionship without manipulation. Sometimes I think back on what happened with Flavia and wonder if I could have done something to prevent her death or Daniel's, but I never find a solid answer. These days I keep up with my routine, trying not to let any major fears linger. I've realized that no matter how much we try to rationalize everything, some experiences remain on the edge of the real and the inexplicable. Maybe there are no concrete proofs of anything supernatural, but the feeling of having been overpowered by a desire not entirely my own still reminds me to never ignore warning signs again. I hope my account warns others not to dive headfirst into situations that seem too good to be true. Sometimes a new feeling rushes in and wipes out everything else, but you've got to keep one foot on solid ground. If I learned anything, it's that real partnership doesn't come from manipulation or desperation. I remain at the factory now with clearer goals for the future. I plan to save enough to start a small business someday and, who knows, build a family in a stable way. The memory of Flavia doesn't fade easily, but each day the weight lifts a bit more. Still, I carry the caution of someone who almost lost himself in a passion wrapped in shadows. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Click the notification bell to stay updated on all future narrations. I post new videos here every day. I hope to see you in the next one. On the screen now, I'm leaving 2 other great videos I know you'll enjoy. See you there.